where do you see the pitfalls of ROI? Not just looking at the numbers and trying to make wise decisions. Where or when do they start to show up?
In my lane, I see it show up really often in the financial side of the church. Decisions to invest in a ministry, decisions to, if you're multi-site, to go to this neighborhood or that neighborhood, decisions to do things on the basis of which donor constituency, giver constituency, as it were, in your church benefits the most from it. There are some things that do need to be evaluated based on what we're going to invest here versus what's likely to happen. But there are also some that are just missions.
Yeah.
Things that you should do regardless of whether the money comes back to you or not. Hello, friends. Jim Shepard here today with my friend and colleague, Frank Beeler, for this episode of
Next Sunday. Hey-o.
What happens next Sunday could change
everything.
Hey, so did you notice that open? I didn't do that, but I was just thinking as soon as I did it, being from Augusta, Georgia, who opens their broadcast every year like that? Jim Nance. Hello, friends.
Hello, friends.
That's the
Look at that, Jim Shepard being like Jim Nance.
Yeah, no, I'm not in his league, bro. He's a whole nother league.
He is special.
He is a whole nother. Dude is polished. Oh my gosh.
You know what? I don't know that I've ever had anybody say you were polished.
No, that hasn't come up. Hasn't come up.
You don't have to worry about that one. You don't have to worry about that one.
Unscripted has come up.
Yeah, there you go.
It's probably why we need to circle back and just kind of head on into this episode, because I can go unscripted for a minute, but we don't want to do that. That's not the purpose. So true. We're trying to cover topics that people actually want to talk about. And Frank, I feel like we're wading in, and you know I've said this from day one. One of the things we want to make sure that we're doing is that we're challenging status quo in a way that would be helpful for you. Both of us are disruptors. We don't mind being that.
Right.
But we're not trying to be disruptors in a negative way. We want it to be redemptive. We want it to be positive. And so I feel like today we're going to walk into some water that has got a lot of status quo embedded in it. And I think that's the reason why we should talk about it. And my guess is, not my guess, I'm pretty certain we're going to say a couple of things today that are going to either make you go, wait, or just look at us and point us, nope, not with you on that one.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's okay. We actually, you know, if you're not okay with something we say here, but at least you've thought through your position and you now know why that's your position, that's better than just sitting there and owning it because it's historically been what you do. And that's what we're talking about, status quo. A lot of what we see in churches, even in other organizations, is the historical norm, and we don't even know why we're doing those things anymore. And so today I feel like we're going to dive in and kind of hit on one that fits into that category. So,
and it's unexpected.
I
don't know that I've ever had a ministry conversation other than with you around this topic. This is not a...
Wait, so you're saying only 3 people are going to listen to this episode?
No, what I'm saying
I
is
hope a lot of people
the
do.
issue is pervasive.
Yeah.
But it's not being discussed.
That's what we're saying.
And it's not a clear pain point. Someone inside every church has experienced being on the wrong side of this, the unpleasant side of this. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But so every church experienced the fallout of this decision-making practice, okay? But it's not something that's like, hey, we need to make sure we're doing this right or wrestling with. It doesn't come up on a leadership team agenda. And honestly, I'm hoping it does. I'm hoping that this podcast forces some leaders to think and go, I need to get my team together and see if they've seen this, observed this, felt this from me as a senior leader or someone else in the organization. And what do we do with this? So I'm hoping to uncover it, if that's okay.
So now that you've created all this mystery and
tension,
intrigue,
what is it?
What is it?
What is
this thing?
Here's what we're talking about. In 3 letters, it's ROI, okay? Return on investment, and how ministry leaders oftentimes approach the decision to do or do something based on that return of investment, whether it be in giving or attendance or other kind of KPIs or goals that are set for a new initiative or ministry. And so we're like, well, we're going to give that. Maybe we say that we're going to try something for 2 years, and then we don't get the splash we want up front. Next thing you know, we tried it for 2 months and we've moved on, because even though we said we want to be patient with growing or having this impactful area of ministry or really invest in this, our tolerance of it getting to where we wanted to get to is probably lower than we even put on paper to begin with.
So great lead in. And I think what I'm thinking when I hear you say that, Frank, I want people to recognize that we're not saying that ROI is a bad thing in and of itself.
No.
So there's both healthy and unhealthy aspects of that. And we're going to talk about some of that
For
today.
sure.
That KPIs are bad things. Lord knows, if anybody knows me and you,
Numbers.
they know we love us some good metrics. Sure. We love some good metrics. Right?
Because the alternative is anecdotal evidence, which is not helpful in making decisions.
Yes, exactly. And it's just like anything. When we go to the extreme of either not paying attention or obsessing over it, those are both going to be unhealthy extremes. And we want to help you try to find somewhere in the middle where you can live with that tension of ROI related to good stewardship of time, of resources, of efforts, of all the things you're putting there, and see it in the right light, not just in maybe the ways that are embedded in your organization.
So the negative side, as we'll call them the rest of this episode, the pitfalls of ROI. Okay? The pitfalls of ROI. That might be an episode title, The Pitfalls of ROI, by next Sunday.
Next Sunday.
So the pitfalls, we're having fun, Jim. I love being with you, man. I love being with you. Let's get super practical.
Yeah.
Right out the gate. Okay. When it comes to the pitfalls of ROI, okay, we know, let's all just agree on the front end that there are things that are worth measuring, and we should evaluate things. We should have standards, and we should have metrics and all that stuff. Let's just let that, from this point forward, assume that everybody agrees that there's value in that. And there are things we should be looking at from a stewardship standpoint and all that. We agree. But if you get too focused on that, there's some pitfalls that arise in our decision-making when it comes to what ministry we do and how we do it. Where do you see this start to show up? Are there specific areas of ministry, or is it seasons of life of leaders? Where do you see the pitfalls of ROI? Not just looking at the numbers and trying to make wise decisions. Where or when do they start to show up?
Well, I think it can show up in any of those areas, but, in my lane, I see it show up really often in the financial side of the church, right? In any number of ways. Decisions to invest in a ministry. Decisions to, if you're multi-site, to go to this neighborhood or that neighborhood. Decisions to do things on the basis of which donor constituency, giver constituency, as it were, in your church benefits the most from it. Things like that, right? And I think what it really comes down to, Frank, for me, is deciding, there are some things that do need to be evaluated based on what we're going to invest here versus what's likely to happen. But there are also some that are just missions. Things that you should do regardless of whether the money comes back to you or not. So let's just take multi-site as an example. You could have two neighborhoods. We need to go over here, but the people are not economically at a place where we'll ever financially justify having a site over there. Or we could go over here and it'll pay for itself inside of 2 years. Now, that's where it really comes to the table. So if this is the people group that you really feel God calling you to over here, and the brokenness is bigger over here, you perceive, then you just take that on as a mission. But it's a mission from day one. It will never, the offerings, that's where it becomes the finance side. Hey, the offerings from this site will pay for what it takes to open at this site within 2 years. I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily. You shouldn't ignore that, but it shouldn't drive every decision to this may be where you're supposed to go, and it's going to cost you money.
Yeah.
You'll never be able to self-sufficient, justify that site. You know that you're going to be investing in them early on and probably for the foreseeable future. But there might be a greater ministry opportunity over there.
So here's what I would say. In order to get there, we just have to go in eyes wide open. And what I see ministry leaders do is they'll think that initially, oh, this is an obvious multi-site expansion location. This one, less obvious, but the need's there. And we'll go, okay, this one's going to be more ministry. We're going to have to fund it from other things. This one will fund itself. We start down the path with that as the mindset. But somewhere along the way, we start to treat all the campuses the same.
Right.
We start to evaluate their metrics the same. We lump them together, and somewhere we get distorted. And we forget that we went in eyes wide open on that campus, being one that will always, in air quotes, underperform in some aspects when it comes to the financial side compared to others. And at some point, it becomes a frustration or tension, or we keep replacing the campus pastor there because the giving isn't getting what it needs to get to. And it's like, wait a second. We started by going eyes wide open on this. Same with churches that start a young adult ministry or college ministry.
Oh, gosh.
Right? They start the ministry knowing that those people, maybe in the future, but certainly now, they're not going to be at a capacity to give, to fund, that it's going to be a black hole of expenses in some ways. Once again, not outside of budget. Let's be responsible, all those things. But somewhere along the way, we go from this being an additional ministry to answer a genuine concern. When we look at our congregation, our scope and ability to serve the people in our community, we identify a gap. And we go in eyes wide open that this is a ministry to do this, and that, thank God, these other things will help fund that. And somewhere along the way, like the old book says, who moved my cheese? The standard changes, the KPIs change, same audience, nothing else changed, but now we have a different expectation. And before long, we're saying, hey, that ministry doesn't make sense anymore because it didn't have the expected effect that they were hoping to, or impact they were hoping to. Do you see what I'm saying?
I absolutely see what you're saying. One thing I want to cover before I dive into my response. Who moved my cheese? How old were you? Were you like third grade when that came out or something, Frank?
Jim,
that's not a book from your generation.
I am a nerd,
were you like
Jim.
8 years
I've read
old
a
when
lot
that
of
came
things.
out? My goodness. But it's a great book. So here's our episode 10, I think, actually covered a real key area where churches miss on that. Remember what we talked about in there? The person who gets raised in your church, you raise them all the way up through high school. They're great Christ followers. They go off to college, and let's just say they're in a college campus ministry. They do well there. They're not prodigals.
Yeah.
They do well there. They come back home, and they're finding a place, and they can't find a place. And they can't find a place because you can't, as a church, rationalize the decision to invest that ministry.
Right.
And whether you said it or didn't say it, it's probably ROI. And I'm not throwing shade at people. We're trying to identify issues, Frank, again and again and again. We're trying to say to people, we're not criticizing you. We're not trying to step on your toes. Frankly, we're stepping on our own toes before we step on yours. We're trying to illuminate opportunities. And this is an opportunity. And by the way, just so we can say this out loud, you and I found out after we recorded episode 10 and talked about those young adults who do that and go away, we have a young lady in our office who fits that profile exactly.
Yeah.
She's frustrated with her church, right? And so while there are, and so we're talking about balancing this whole idea of wise ministry and good stewardship. And sometimes the good stewardship is we know we're going to invest beyond what we're likely to see in a financial return, but the ministry opportunity is too great for us to ignore it. And let that become the driving factor. Because I think when we talk about the campus thing, the analogy that we just used, the likelihood is that campus that's not, can we say this word, carrying its weight financially, might be the one where the greatest ministry stories are evolving. It's this greater brokenness over there. And yet we have this amnesia. We forget, this organizational amnesia that we forget. When we started them, we never expected them to pay their way in the first place. So why are we doing that now? Right. We lump them together and look at the performance of all of them, right? And so that's what we're trying to get on the table, is this idea of don't let simply ROI alone drive your decision making. It's a part of it. Yeah. And there's sometimes when it should move to the front, and there's sometimes when it should sit in the back seat and maybe just speak a little bit. Yeah. And maybe there's sometimes when it ought to be driving the car. That was a good analogy right there. I just thought of that. Right? That's good. And that's what the point you and I are trying to make. And the issue is, as you said in the introduction, that nobody's talking about this and everybody's seeing it happen in front of them.
How does impatience show up as a problem with this? Because oftentimes we feel like God's called us to start serving another generation or to open up a ministry. We know it's going to take some time. Maybe we think there's going to be some hard soil along the way to kind of get this thing going. But where do you think the numbers creep in and have more influence, that ROI has more influence, where it didn't start that way simply because of a ministry leader's impatience or unspoken expectations?
I laughed when you started this because you looked at me and you're asking me about impatience. You're asking the most impetuous, impatient person probably in this room to weigh in on that, right? Yeah. I just, just take it off in a Bible just for a second, and I'll come back and circle that back in. So for me, the story in the Garden of Gethsemane is so real because what Peter did is what I would have done. It's like, wait, Lord, let's just take this into my own hands because I got a better solution here. Right. I can take care of this right now. I'll just whack his ear off. We'll start to lop heads off in here, and this can end really quick. But Jesus is saying, no, I've got a better way. Yeah. I've got a better way for all of this, right? It was the mistake that all of the disciples made in thinking that Jesus came to take on Rome, and what he came to take on was a bigger enemy. He came to take on Satan, not Rome, right? No, another whole conversation. But it's the impatience of Peter that I have to constantly restrain in my life. And the idea, Frank, is this, that I think you're getting to, is to see past what appears to be right there on the surface and look at the underlying factors that could be the greater argument for doing what you're doing. Does that make, you're following where I'm going here? And so when we're not patient, then emotion tends to drive what's going on. And not that I'm good at it, probably better at it than I used to be, but I'm not good at it. But I had an early business mentor who said to me over and over and over again, there is an inverse relationship between your emotions and decision-making. When emotionalism is high, your decision-making will be notoriously poor. And when your emotion level is low, your decision-making gets better. That's what we're talking about. Stopping, not letting emotion drive it, whether it's, and I'm not talking about overly emotional, like drama or something. Emotion could just be my attachment to that, my emotional attachment. I really like that ministry. I really like that product. I don't like that ministry, right? And it drives us to want to prefer things and find evidence to do things, where if you just stay back and just be objective, it's like, well, there's a better decision here, right? ROI is a part of that, but it's not the only thing, right? There are other factors of who gets affected. What would be the thing that would honor God more in this moment? And sometimes, in fact, maybe often, the thing that honors God more is going and investing where there's no return. Yeah. Well, or little return, right? And when you can't make sense of it in terms of human sense, but it's wise in the eyes of the gospel.
That's
right?
so good.
Going to people who, if we don't go reach them, they might be unreached. These young adults returning from college who are trying to find their place, and the church doesn't have a place for them. Yeah. They're not married. They don't have families. They're not old. I mean, they don't fit into any people group. They are their own people group. And you've got to create a ministry to them, and you do it knowing there's a great mission field. It's a long play, but you're probably not going to see the return in your lifetime. Or maybe not see the return in your lifetime. Yeah. Right? I think that's what you're referring to, is just backing off, seeing the bigger picture, being patient enough, right? Because I know that my impetuousness and my patience is wanting to see things happen fast, and sometimes fast and right are not the same.
That's so
Sometimes
good,
it really
Jim.
is a choice between the two. We can do it quickly or we can do it right, but not both.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can do both,
Sure.
but sometimes it's a choice. And so patience says, let's wait on the bigger, better thing. Hey, I know we made a decision tonight. Let's go away for a week and let's just open ourselves up to God. Each one of us individually. There are 5 of us on this committee in this room. Let's go away and let's live with this decision for 1 week. And next Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, it's 8 o'clock right now, next Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, let's convene a Zoom call for 15 minutes just to check and see, are we all still here at the same place that we were a week ago?
Yeah.
Has God shown us something different? Has God shown us a different direction, a better way? Or are we still on board with this? And I think you've got a chance to affirm or redirect based on that rather than just saying, hey, we've done 5-0. It's unanimous in the room. We're moving on. Now, there are some decisions like that, but there are others where the patience and prayer coming in as a part of your patience to invoke God. Hey, Lord, we may have missed something here tonight. You know, we had a lot of opinions kind of flying around in the room here, and it feels like we arrived at a place that honors you and brings glory to your name. But how about if you help us individually as we go into our quiet spaces and you tell us whether we're on the right path or not?
Yeah. Oftentimes, coming out of meetings when we're deciding about ministry, decisions are delayed because we're hoping for more information. When we already have all the information we need, the only reason to delay is just to have a little more time with God on the idea. Yeah, so good. I wrote this down when you were sharing about this ROI and this whole process. It's just kind of crossed my mind. Oftentimes when we do decide to go into a new area of ministry, whether it be a new campus, whether it be a young adults ministry, or we're going to do a better job with teens or whatever, maybe a women's ministry, men's ministry, whatever it is, we start it and then at some point we stop it. I wrote down this question. Did God change his mind or did it just get difficult and slow? And so oftentimes we'll get up and say, God is calling us to do this, but when it is difficult and or slow, suddenly we question the calling. And so maybe every once in a while God's closing a door and that's not ours to do. Maybe we were impetuous and we jumped in on something. But I think sometimes, to your point about patience, we just need to slow down and realize that just because it's difficult and slow doesn't mean it isn't what God has called us to do.
Well, and I think for me sometimes, Frank, and I have to guard against this, is you know this about me. I believe that in God's economy, even our mistakes are not wasted.
Yeah.
Nothing's wasted in God's economy. So I can think that I heard from God. I think that I prayed, and I go off and like, oh, that wasn't the right. It's just different than that, right? And so there can be this idea, and I don't do it often, but I find myself every now and then, it's like, well, whether it's right or wrong, God will redeem it, right? And I can't take that posture. I've got to try to find, what is it that God would have me to do would be the right step here.
Yeah.
But and my confidence in God is that even if in all of my diligence in pursuing a prayerful, careful answer to something that he would want me as a ministry objective or whatever that might be, serving in my church, that God can circle back around and say, hey, Jim, you might have had that wrong. And then he uses even that to show us humility, to show us a better way, the other things like that. And I think that's the whole idea. And now, by the way, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't call out, there are some great places where ROI can jump in and it can be very healthy. I was sitting there when we were talking through that and I was remembering, of course, I'm big on how churches handle the giving moment. No secret there. We've talked about that before, probably talk about it again. So I go to a church that was a new client. I happened to be there on a Sunday. It happened to be in a town where I had some friends. We were in town for the weekend with friends. I went to the service on a Sunday. They did not actually know I was there. I had meetings with them the next day. They did not know I was there. So it was a really cool test of the giving moment. And so the youth pastor came and gave the offering moment. And he said, hey, I just wanted to come in here this morning and just say to you, as you give to our church, one of the things that's so cool is our giving funds this retreat that we've done with our young people. We took 138 people, I think it was, or something like that. And he had X number of first-time decisions and X number of readings. And I just want you to know, when you give, it's not a really big financial investment in our ministry, but it allows everyone who wants to go without financial limitation, because we don't charge for this. And that way we were able to take 138 we saw first times and second times. Right? That's a dramatic demonstration of ROI. When you give here, this kind of amazing, cool stuff happens. Yeah. Now, we can't make that too much of the issue, because our giving is really an attitude of worship, not just of impact. Right. But impact matters. I want to know, as I'm being a good steward, and back to this whole thing that we talked about in the previous episode, in trust, in mega churches, or big churches, let's just say big churches, the bigger the church, the harder it is for people to understand the impact that you're having. That's why stories like this, when you're having impact relative to a modest investment, and he's telling this story. And so I went in the next day and I was like, I came here to really kind of, hopefully kind of give you guys some good feedback on how poor your offering moment was yesterday. But did y'all know I was here yesterday? Because y'all had a killer offering, and they all laughed. Yeah. And it's like, no, actually, we're never that good. So come back next Sunday. It won't be nearly as good. You can come. And I'm like, well, I'll check that out online. But it was so cool because, there are places for us to talk about ROI, right? Yeah. And in an appropriate manner. And so we don't want to give it a bad name. We want to make sure that you see both the healthy and the unhealthy ways that ROI is creeping around in your organization. As you said in the intro, it's there. Yeah. It's not that we're bringing something to light that's not there. We're just bringing it to light so you can talk about it. Yeah.
The greater the changes for the church and methodology of ministry, approach to ministry, the longer it's going to take to see the impact most of the time. Because we've got to kind of help people make the adjustments and get familiar with it. If you're starting a young adult ministry, it may start very small and it takes time to gain momentum, but momentum may be a couple more. It doesn't mean that it's going to multiply in some radical way, right? And so how do you feel about when God is leading you a certain direction and you're starting a new area of ministry or wanting to invest in something that is going to have a slow return? How do you feel about keeping in front of ourselves as ministry leaders the long-term plan that we did the work on the front end? Because it feels like once we document it, put it together, say this is what we're going to do, it's kind of like a job description. You never go back to it. Once you look at it the one time and go, yep, that's my job, and then it changes 5 times, but you never go back to it again. I think that's true for ministry planning. We will set a goal and say, man, wouldn't it be amazing if over the next 2 years we saw X? But then we never go back to that plan and we just get started and our criteria is just moving all around. How do you see that creep in? And do you think that influences the patience or that ROI because people start to shift the timeline around based on how long it feels like it's been, or it feels like they're not doing enough rather than the playbook that we all agreed to?
So that's probably the place, Frank, where patience really is important. What I see many times is a new initiative that a church has started, whatever that might be, and they give it some time and it doesn't appear to be working, and they pull the plug right before it hits a tipping point. Yeah. Because tipping points are real, right? You build toward tipping points. There's foundation. There's all this other infrastructure that you lay out. I'm just thinking of it now, and I'm not checking. If I'd known we were going to talk about this, I was going to use this analogy, I would have checked it. So forgive me if I'm off a little bit, but I think I've got it pretty much right. Bamboo. Bamboo grows from a shoot very, very slowly. Year 1, year 2, year 3. I think it's year 4 even. So it doesn't grow very much. But like in year 5, it grows like 4 or 5 feet. And so the question is this, Frank. Did it grow 5 feet? Let's just say it's 5. Did it grow 5 feet in a year, or did it grow 5 feet in 5 years? Well, the answer is it grew 5 feet in 5 years.
Yeah.
Because without the infrastructure, you don't get that. And that's the tipping point we're talking about, is right when it gets to that. And so just when you commit, think about what's our time horizon here. We're going to give this 2 years. Well, if you're going to give it 2 years, don't pull the plug in 7 months.
Right.
Now, by the way, there can be disasters.
Sure.
Things that clearly are not working. We're not saying that. If it's working and you're building and you're getting some infrastructure, everything is not about numeric growth. Sometimes foundations just take time. Mm-hmm. We've got the right youth. Let's just say you're building an initiative in youth ministry. We've got the right leader. He's doing the right things. Hey, he's got 11 people that he's building his core around him. He's going to build around the 11. It's going to take him 10 to 12 months. We shouldn't really expect this to grow too much beyond the 11 because he's growing the 11, discipling them so that they can then become a part of this shoot that grows a little bit and then all of a sudden hits that tipping point and moves on. That's where patience comes in. And everything in our society screams now.
Yeah. And
in the church, we've got to push back against now so that we can see the long play. Long plays are good.
You know, you say that, my mind immediately went to, it's as though when we're drawing out the plan, the graph of growth, we do at a 45-degree angle.
Oh, no.
It's just going to go, it's really a low curve that's making no progress or very little progress.
Like a 3-degree angle.
3-degree angle that all of a sudden has a swoop. To your point, the tipping point. Yeah. Pastor Stephen at Elevation, one of my favorite sermons I ever heard him preach is called Don't Stop on 6. Talk about walking around the walls of Jericho. Great message, but it applies to this, right? It's like you might be right there at it, and we all agreed that we're going to give it X amount of time. Now we're changing it. I will give a word of caution just because of where we're at in the conversation. Oftentimes, our new initiatives are handed off to new leaders in a new setting, your church. You've brought them in without any support from the established, mature leaders that have been in your congregation, your context for a while. We're very empowering of the new person that's having to navigate new church context, new ministry context, new launch of something. And whether we say it in the reporting structure or not, we've basically sent them out there and assumed that they're good and they can build this. Without really setting them up for success. So we built this plan before we even hired them. We build a plan oftentimes, and we're handing them the plan, but we're not sending somebody along with them to help them orchestrate that. So sometimes our ROI is we hired a manager of our new ice cream shop and we left. We're the owners and we left. And we're coming back and going, hey, I hope everything turned out okay. Where it's like, no. Especially if it's somebody new that we're empowering with this incredible opportunity, we got to stay close to them, not to micromanage them, but to make sure they have what they need. And they may be missing, there may be some things they need that they don't even know to ask for. But that seasoned leader that may not be able to do anything with young adults or youth ministry or have any confidence in like leading that per se, they know some of the leadership stuff that's necessary to set this thing up for success. So we may allocate a budget line item, we may allocate a hire, but we may not allocate any equipping to help them actually get that and push through those hard moments.
Yeah, I love that, Frank. And that, I mean, what you've identified is so true. And I just think in terms of ministry leadership, what would it look like for us to grow leadership pipelines where I've got an understudy who can take over my thing and then I can move over and do the new thing because I'm the most experienced leader rather than having that person move over and do it. I've got the stripes. I'm young enough. Right. I'm old enough. Yep. I can do these kinds of things and I can move over and do that. There actually is a church, won't name them here, that did their multi-site strategy exactly that way. The leader, the founding pastor, would start a new site. He would grow the understudy. He would, in a big city where it's hard to grow churches, he would grow the church to a certain level, hand it off to the understudy, and then he'd go start the new site. Mm-hmm. And it's not surprising. He was pretty successful with that strategy.
That makes sense.
Because he was taking it. And so that's an ROI move, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm taking the person who is most capable and most likely to be able to pull this off and moving them somewhere else and leaving behind somebody that I personally mentor.
That's so good.
Right?
So good.
And what if we could replicate that as kind of an ROI strategy in the church for leadership development, for example? Right? Because what you said is all too true.
Yeah.
The guy who just got out of seminary, who doesn't even know how church works, and we're going to hand something off to him that's new. And we're like, wait, that's not going the way we hoped it would. Well, of course it's not. You didn't hand it off to the right leader.
Yeah.
So ROI is
on him.
in there. It's not on him, right?
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah, so being wise.
Any final thoughts on this idea of ROI that you want to make sure that people really if they take away one kind of key principle from here, from some of the stuff maybe you're talking about at the top, what's that one thing that you're like, okay, we've got to go back to revisit this. We've got to be eyes wide open in the way we approach ministry.
I would say call it out as the elephant in the room.
Okay.
Frank. It is the elephant in the room. It's sitting there. You and I both know it is. And that's what we started off by talking at the top. It's there. So let's talk about it. See both the healthy and the unhealthy tendencies of ROI.
Yeah.
And let there be open, frank, candid, honest conversations about that as a part of your decision making. I think that would be, if I had to say a couple of things that would be big takeaways. A lot of the other stuff that it might or might not be helpful, and we hope it is, obviously, but the big ideas would be, this is the elephant in the room. So just look him in the face and call him out and have open, frank, honest conversations around it.
That's so good. We share all this with you because we know that what happens next Sunday could
change everything. Hey-o.